In the year 50 for AD, the Roman Empire breathed a collective sigh of relief. After the paranoid reign of Tiberius, the madness of Caligula, and the feeble rule of Claudius, a new era had dawned. Their new emperor was just 16 years old, a handsome, charismatic, and artistically gifted youth named Nero. He was the great-grandson of the legendary Augustus, and he promised a return to glory, a new golden age. But this golden boy, this beacon of hope, would one day stand accused of burning his own capital to the ground, and would illuminate his palace gardens with the burning bodies of innocent men and women. So, how did this happen? How did Rome's young savior become one of history's most infamous monsters? The answer begins not with him, but with the woman who created him, his mother. Her name was Agrippina the Younger, and she was ambition forged into human form. A woman of immense cunning and utter ruthlessness, she had clawed her way to the absolute center of power. She seduced and married her own uncle, the sitting Emperor Claudius, convincing him to adopt her son, Nero, and name him heir over his own biological child. And then, once Nero was old enough, ancient historians allege she served Claudius his final meal, a carefully prepared dish of poisoned mushrooms. With Claudius dead, Agrippina moved with lightning speed, securing the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard and presenting her son to the Senate. As the new master of the Roman world, she had committed seduction, incest, and murder to build a throne for her son. But she had no intention of letting him rule it alone. Agrippina saw herself as a co-ruler, the true power behind the throne. Her face was minted alongside Nero's on the imperial coins. She attempted to sit beside him during official audiences, a shocking breach of Roman tradition. She was the architect of his reign, and she would not be cast aside. But a seed of resentment began to grow in the young emperor. Guided by his powerful advisors, the philosopher Seneca and the soldier Boris, Nero began to push back against the mother who sought to dominate him. The Roman court became a battlefield of wills, a silent, deadly war between a mother who refused to let go and a son who was discovering the terrifying, absolute nature of his own power. Was Nero born with a seed of cruelty? Or was that seed planted and watered by the very woman who gave him the world? For the first 5 years of his reign, the golden age of Nero was, for the most part, real. The empire was administered competently, the Senate was treated with respect, and the people were kept content. But this stability was an illusion crafted by two men, Seneca and Boris. While Nero's powerful advisors managed the affairs of state, their most important task was managing his mother. Step by step, they worked to dismantle Agrippina's influence. They countered her political maneuvers, politely ejected her from state meetings, and eventually convinced Nero to strip her of her military bodyguard and banish her from the imperial palace. The message was clear. Her time as the Shadow Empress was over. Enraged, Agrippina fought back, threatening to support Claudius's biological son, Britannicus, as the true heir to the throne. Shortly thereafter, the young Britannicus died under mysterious circumstances at a dinner party, very likely from a poison administered on Nero's orders. The power struggle was turning deadly, while his advisors played politics. Nero retreated into his own world, a world of art, music, and performance. This was his true passion and his deepest shame. He saw himself as a world-class artist, a peerless singer and lyre player. He wrote poetry, competed in chariot races, and dreamed of being celebrated on stage. But in the rigid, hierarchical world of Rome, this was scandalous for an emperor, the embodiment of military authority and masculine dignity. To desire the applause of the masses like a common actor was seen as a profound disgrace. It was a dereliction of duty, an embrace of Greek decadence that horrified the Stoic Roman aristocracy. Yet, Nero craved it. He needed the adoration of the crowd, not as their ruler, but as their star. This disconnect between the emperor he was supposed to be and the artist he wanted to be began to warp his perception of reality. The final break was inevitable as Nero grew more confident in his power, and with his ambitious mistress Poppaea Sabina whispering in his ear, he came to a terrifying conclusion. To be truly free, his mother had to die. But he was haunted by the optics of bald-faced murder. He wanted it to look like an accident. What followed was a plot so bizarre it would be comical if it weren't so sinister. Nero commissioned a special boat, designed so that its lead-weighted canopy would collapse and crush his mother, or the vessel itself would fall apart at sea. He invited Agrippina to a cordial dinner, then sent her off on the death boat with every show of affection. The plan was a catastrophic failure. The canopy mechanism malfunctioned, and while the boat did begin to sink, the formidable Agrippina proved to be a strong swimmer. She survived the wreck and made it to shore, fully aware that her son had just tried to kill her. When news of her survival reached Nero, he was paralyzed with terror. He knew his mother would now stop at nothing to destroy him. Subtlety had failed. So, in a fit of panic, he dropped all pretense. He sent 3 armed assassins to her seaside villa. When they cornered her in her bedroom, Agrippina stared down her killers with defiance. According to the historian Tacitus, she tore open her dress, exposed her abdomen, and commanded them, "Strike the wound that bore this monster." They cut her down. The Rubicon had been crossed. The crime that was unspeakable even for a Roman emperor had been committed. The golden boy was gone, and a new, darker figure was beginning to take his place. With his mother gone, Nero was finally, truly free. He was the absolute master of the world, with no one left to challenge his authority or question his whims. He divorced and later executed his politically inconvenient wife, Octavia, and married his glamorous mistress, Poppaea Sabina. He began to indulge his artistic passions publicly, scandalizing the Senate by performing on stage, singing and playing his lyre for all to see. For a brief moment, he had everything he ever wanted. But the crime of matricide leaves a stain on the soul. Roman historians say that Nero was haunted by the ghost of his mother, that he saw her phantom in his waking hours and his dreams. The guilt curdled into a deep and profound paranoia. He saw assassins in every shadow and conspiracies in every whisper. The man who had killed his own mother now trusted no one. He began a series of treason trials, executing or forcing the suicide of anyone he remotely suspected of disloyalty. The emperor was no longer just a performer. He was a man at war with the phantoms in his own mind. Then, in the summer of 64 AD, came the Inferno, the great fire of Rome. For 6 days and 7 nights, a monstrous fire raged through the city's dense wooden tenements. It consumed entire districts, destroying 2/3 of the capital. Tens of thousands were left homeless, and the city that was the heart of the known world was reduced to a smoldering ruin. As the city burned, a rumor began to spread. A story so damning it has defined Nero for 2,000 years. The historian Tacitus reports that as the flames devoured Rome, Nero stood on the roof of his palace, watching the devastation and, dressed in full costume, played his lyre and sang an epic poem about the fall of ancient Troy. The image was unforgettable, the emperor fiddling while his city burned. An even more sinister rumor followed, that Nero himself had started the fire, secretly ordering his agents to set the blaze so he could clear land to build a magnificent new palace worthy of his ego. True or not, the Roman people were enraged. They had lost everything, and they believed their emperor was to blame. The city was in ashes, and the people demanded a culprit. Nero needed a scapegoat, and he needed one fast. He found one in a small, insular, and widely misunderstood religious sect that had taken root in the city's underclass, the Christians. Romans viewed them with deep suspicion. Their refusal to worship the Roman gods was seen as atheism, and their private rituals were rumored to involve cannibalism and incest. They were the perfect outsiders. Nero declared that the Christians had conspired to burn down Rome, and he unleashed upon them a wave of persecution of such sadistic cruelty. It reportedly shocked even the hardened Roman populace. He had them covered in the skins of wild animals, and then torn to pieces by dogs in the arena. He ordered mass crucifixions, and in the most infamous display of his depravity, he had Christians tied to stakes in his private gardens, covered their bodies in flammable pitch, and set them on fire. They became human torches, their burning bodies serving as the grotesque lighting for the emperor's evening parties. The transformation was complete. The golden boy, the artist, the troubled son, all were gone, consumed by the flames of his own monstrous cruelty. With Rome's ashes still warm, Nero began his most ambitious project, the construction of a palace so vast and opulent it would be a world unto itself. He called it the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. Built on land cleared by the Great Fire, this was not a home. It was a monument to his own divinity. Sprawling over hundreds of acres in the very heart of the city, it featured an immense, man-made lake, fields and pastures with herds of wild animals and vineyards. The palace itself was an architectural marvel of marble, ivory, and gold. It had dining rooms with revolving ceilings that showered guests with flowers and perfume. It had pipes that could fill its baths with water from either the sea or a sulfur spring. At its entrance stood the Colossus Neronis, a bronze statue of himself as the sun god, over 100 feet tall. While many Romans were still homeless and destitute, their emperor was building himself a private paradise. He famously declared that he could finally begin to live like a human being. But beneath the gilded surface of this new Rome, resentment was boiling. The traditional aristocracy, the Senate, and even members of his own court had watched with horror as their emperor devolved from a ruler into a preening, murderous tyrant. In 65 AD, Their fear and anger coalesced into a major plot to assassinate him and place a new emperor on the throne, the Personian conspiracy. When the plot was uncovered, Nero's already fragile paranoia shattered completely. He unleashed a new reign of terror, a brutal purge of anyone even remotely connected to the conspiracy. This time, the purge was personal. He ordered the death of the poet Lucan. He ordered the death of the writer Petronius. And in the most poignant act of betrayal, he commanded his old tutor, the man who had guided his youth and tried to temper his worst impulses, the philosopher Seneca, to take his own life. The monster was now devouring its own creator. No one was safe, having crushed all opposition. Nero was now utterly convinced of his own genius and invincibility. In 66 AD, he embarked on the ultimate vanity project, a grand tour of Greece. He went not as a conquering emperor, but as a competing artist. He ordered that all 4 of the major Pan-Hellenic Games, including the Olympics, be held in a single year to accommodate his visit. He entered every competition in music, acting, and poetry. And, of course, he won every single one. The terrified Greek officials, fearing for their lives, awarded him over 1,800 victory wreaths. The charade reached its peak at the Olympic Games, where Nero entered a 10-horse chariot race. He was thrown from his chariot and failed to finish. Yet the judges, in a spectacular display of sycophancy, still declared him the winner. He returned to Rome not in the traditional military triumph of a victorious general, but in a gaudy parade of his own artistic victories, wearing a star-spangled crown and carrying his lyre. He had lost all touch with reality. The Emperor of Rome was gone, replaced by a delusional performer playing to a captive audience of 1 million subjects, who were forced to applaud on cue. The final act of this tragedy was about to begin. While Nero was parading through Italy like a conquering hero, the empire he had neglected was beginning to fracture. In the spring of 68 AD, the governor of Gaul, Gaius Julius Vindex, openly rebelled, denouncing Nero as an unfit and disgraceful ruler. Though Vindex's revolt was quickly suppressed, the spell of Nero's invincibility was broken. Soon after, the governor of Hispania, Galba, also declared his opposition. This time, the rebellion spread. Crucially, the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's elite personal bodyguards, were bribed to abandon their master. Seeing their chance, the Senate, which had lived in terror of Nero for years, finally found its courage. They declared Nero a public enemy, to be executed by flogging. In a matter of weeks, the man who saw himself as a living god, the absolute master of the world, found himself utterly alone, a fugitive in his own city. His end was not defiant or tragic, but pathetic, disguised in a shabby cloak. He fled the palace and hid in a small villa outside the city. For hours he paced back and forth, paralyzed by fear and self-pity, unable to summon the courage to take his own life as Roman tradition demanded. He lamented his fate, ordered his own grave to be dug, and repeatedly burst into tears. When he heard the sound of horsemen approaching to arrest him, he finally forced his private secretary to help him plunge a dagger into his throat. As he lay dying, he reportedly uttered a phrase that would perfectly encapsulate his lifelong delusion. He was not a failed emperor. He was not a monster in his own eyes. He was a misunderstood genius. His final words were, "Qualis artifex breo." What an artist dies. In me, Rome celebrated the news of the tyrant's death, but their relief was short-lived. Nero's demise left a power vacuum that unleashed a year of bloody civil war, with 4 different emperors rising and falling in quick succession. He was a terrible ruler, but his removal broke the stability of the empire. His legacy is a timeless warning. It is the story of how a young man with artistic sensibilities, when twisted by family trauma, suffocated by absolute power, and consumed by a bottomless narcissism, can become a monster. He is a testament to the fact that the most terrifying tyrants are often not those who crave power for its own sake, but those who demand the entire world become a stage for their own ego and are willing to burn it down if it refuses to applaud. Nero's last words were, "What an artist dies in me." But what truly died that day? A misunderstood artist, a pathetic tyrant, or a monster of his own making? Share your judgment in the comments below. And to ensure you don't miss our next descent into history's darkest minds, subscribe to the Black Chronicle.